Hello, and welcome to episode 10 of the Mystic Space podcast. My name's Elise, and today we're going to be talking all about women's health, which, if you guys know me or have heard my previous episodes, or you follow me on social media, you would know that this is a topic I am very passionate about. This is something that is very close to home for me. If you guys don't know my backstory, I was diagnosed with PCOS, endometriosis, and Asherman syndrome, and it's really close to home for me because it's something that I struggled with a lot. And it was something that my doctors told me were incurable and that it was basically something that I would have to live with forever. Basically, the only thing that they could say and suggest for me to do was to either get a hysterectomy, which means removing my uterus and all my ovaries, and the other option was for me to have multiple surgeries. So I did have a laparoscopy, and my gynecologist at the time wanted me to further and do another one about a year later after my first one. And for me, it was just something that I did not want to continue a life path of, taking pills and getting surgeries. And I basically just didn't want to take no for an answer. I just didn't want to hear that this is just how it is and kind of too bad. There's nothing really that we can do for you. So it kind of sparked my entire holistic health journey. But why I think it's so important to talk about and why I am so passionate about it and why I feel like it is so important to share is because it is just so unknown by, unfortunately, modern science or Western science, whatever you want to call it. And it's really sad because they don't really know about it. So, how are we supposed to know about it? Because there's very little education about it. There's very little talk about it. I mean, doctors don't really know what the cause are. They say that there's no real cause and that there's no cure. And just in general, women's health is so important to know. But again, it is so overlooked, and not a lot of people know how our bodies really work. And it's kind of sad because we run completely different than men. And, the world that we live in, the society we live in, was predominantly built by men, scientists. All the pills and everything that are even tested usually are tested on a male body to see how a male reacts with it and things like that. So women are kind of overlooked in the society and in science and in the healthcare system. So, as you guys know, I'm not super into like statistics and everything like that, but just to share some statistics with you, 1 in 7 women in Australia are diagnosed with endometriosis, and it takes on average about 7 years to get diagnosed with that. And that was the case for me as well. I took a very long time to get diagnosed. I had period issues since I was a teenager, and then they threw me on the contraceptive pill. And I only got diagnosed when I was, oh, I can't even remember the age, about like 25, 26 or something like that. Most women are not really taught about our bodies and how they work, even in like school and health ed and things like that. It's all very like general, but we're not really taught about our period. What is our period? What does hormonal contraception even do? Because a lot of teenagers are on hormonal contraception, obviously for, pregnancy prevention and a lot of other issues as well, because a lot of people present a lot of issues within their period very young in their early teenagers. Even sometimes when they first get their period, like me, when I first got my period, it was crazy. It was whack. It was all over the place. It was like coming every few months and then sometimes 2 or 3 times a month. And it was just very painful and very heavy. And now that I've done my own research, I see that that was a sign that my body was trying to tell me. And also, it is very normal for when women first get their period to take a long time or a period of time that your body will kind of adjust and take a while to regulate itself because it's going through a huge change. And that's one thing that we're not really taught to understand how much our bodies are so different and how much our bodies go through so many things within our cycle just to even have a period. Unfortunately, a lot of us are just taught that our period is something that we be shameful about and that we should hide it and it's gross and it's disgusting and all of these things. And we're not really taught the importance of our period and how to take care of ourselves. I'm sure probably most women in this world have some story of where they leaked and they were embarrassed or where they got made fun of in high school or primary school, even because, some kids get it really early. And because we're not taught about it and because it's not very accepted by society in general, society still deems it as a very like disgusting thing that we need to hide away. Then a lot of women and young children that are getting their periods and teenagers and everything like that are super embarrassed of getting their period. And it's really sad to see because it's not something that we should be ashamed of. It's not something that we should be embarrassed of. It's a natural thing that our bodies do. And it's actually a really beautiful thing when you learn a lot more about it. Even something like pregnancy, a lot of us are not taught how to get pregnant, when we can get pregnant, and everything like that. We're just told that if you have sex, you can get pregnant. And that's why a lot of people are thrown on hormonal contraception as teenagers, because obviously a lot of teenagers don't want to get pregnant. But instead of educating, us and teaching us about our bodies, we're kind of just, again, it's almost like a fear thing, like just don't have sex because you're going to get pregnant. So just do this instead so you don't get pregnant, instead of teaching us how our body actually works, that we can only actually get pregnant for about 5 to 7 days as a window in our whole monthly cycle, because the sperm can actually live inside us for up to 7 days. So, but we're only ovulating for about 24 hours. So it's only around that little tiny window where we can actually get pregnant. And a lot of women don't even know this. We're only really taught this when we're either trying to conceive or when we learn it ourselves, which is kind of sad. We should be educated from a young age about our bodies, and that should be either from our parents or from our education system if our parents fail us and don't want to educate us in that sense because of a lot of array of things, obviously different cultures and things like that. Some people are still so ashamed in their culture about their periods. And like for me, as an example, I was not taught anything about my period before I got it. I just started bleeding and freaked out because I had no idea what was going on. And a lot of women actually go through that. A lot of women actually just get their period and they have no idea what it is, or they have an idea, like maybe they've heard of it, but they don't really kind of understand it. And it can be scary because, like, you just start bleeding from a body part and you start getting all these pains, and you're like, what the fuck is going on? And I truly believe that there is so much power in knowledge. And that is something that, on a side note, I feel like our system don't want to give us. They don't want to give us our power. They don't want us to have education in how our own bodies work, because then we're kind of dependent on them to teach us and for them to fix us or for them to tell us what we can do. One of the biggest problems with being a woman is that we unfortunately are living in a man's world. I mean, in the West anyway, I don't know about in other cultures around the world, but for the most part, most countries, we're living under the patriarchy, which means we're living in a world run by men, which is designed for men. Now, men and women operate completely different. Men actually have a 24-hour hormone cycle. So every single day, they're basically the same. Their hormones are the same. Whereas women, we are completely different. We have a monthly cycle. So roughly about 28 days. And again, it's so different for every single woman because we're all different, but it's give or take about those times. And it just depends on how healthy you are. And, all of this kind of everything I'm going to say in this podcast really just depends on how healthy you are and how regular your periods are. But that's how it kind of should be, roughly around 28 days. And within those 28 days, we have 4 phases. So we have phases where our hormones are going up and down, and we're changing. We're not like a man. We don't have all of those hormones come to us in one day and then the next day it's the same. So, at one point in our cycle, we might have really low energy, and then in one other point in our cycle, we have really high energy. And that changes throughout the whole month, which I'll get into. But it's just a reminder that you are not living in a world designed for you. You're not living in a world that understands how your body works. You can't show up to work every single day for an entire month because you work differently. You need different periods of time to do different things because that's how our bodies work. We're better at doing some things during one period of our cycle and then another during another. And the world that we live in doesn't understand this because it's made and run by men, unfortunately. So it's like made to work, 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 be very direct, be very, you know, different than how we actually live. And doing that puts us in a state of survival because we are trying to force ourselves to go to work when we're in pain. I'm sure every single woman in this world probably would understand at some point, you know, having period pains and trying to go to work is one of the hardest things that you'll do, especially if you do struggle with anything else on top of your periods, like PCOS, endometriosis, and other things. Because again, I'm gonna share that having a really, really painful period is actually not normal. So there's obviously something going on there, but a lot of women experience this. A lot of women have a lot of pain. And again, it's sad because we're not educated on why, and we're not educated on how that could actually change. We're not doomed to have painful periods for the rest of our life. We can actually change. There's actually a sign there that our body's trying to give us so that we can move into a more healthier version of ourselves so that we're not in pain. That does not mean that we're still meant to live the world that the society has built for us, because it's still not made for us. But it does make it a little bit easier. But it's to remind you that if you are a woman living in this world and you're struggling with your period, then I just want you to be gentle with yourself, because unfortunately, this world was not made for you, and it will put you in a state of survival, in stress, in heightened emotions, because you can't function the way you should actually function, which is in flow, not structurally. One of the things that I think a lot of people need to research and try to understand a lot more is, what is hormonal contraception actually doing to us? And, why has it been such a band-aid for a lot of women's symptoms? And of course, it can help. And I'm just going to remind you all, I'm not here to hate or discredit anyone's, path or anyone's medication. If it's helping you, that's fine. Like, I'm not here saying that I'm against Western medicine or anything like that. If you guys know, I always advocate for it. I think there's a time and place for it. But I truly believe that hormonal contraception is something that really needs to be looked at a lot more, because I think it's affecting women on such a deeper level than we can truly understand at the moment. Because you have to understand, hormonal contraception hasn't been around for a very, very, very long time in comparison to humanity. So we don't really truly understand how much it's impacting us. And it's something that they're coming out now with a lot more research and understanding, because being on hormonal contraception, it fucks with your hormones. It completely changes your hormones. It basically tells your body that you're pregnant, that you're not allowed to ovulate because you're already pregnant. And for me personally, I just don't think that's natural. And I really hate that I was on hormonal contraception for so long, because I truly believe that it was probably a bit of a cause of all my issues later down the track as well, because it's suppressing your body's natural cycle. It's suppressing how your body is supposed to be. And again, I'm not saying that you should not take it. If it's helping you and whatever else, that's totally fine. I just highly encourage women to keep an open mind and to do more research and just kind of understand why you're on the hormonal contraception, and if there's anything else that you can do, if there's another path that you can take to get down to the root problem of why you may need it. And if you're doing it for pregnancy because, you obviously don't want to get pregnant or anything like that, there are a lot of other options that you can look into to avoid getting pregnant without having to put synthetic hormones into your body. Now, I'm not going to talk too deeply about hormonal contraception because I feel like that's one entire podcast episode on its own. But I do want to talk mostly about our bodies and how they work. So, this just depends because everyone is different, and most of the information that I'm going to be sharing with you in this podcast are mostly for people who aren't on hormonal contraception, because again, it blocks your natural rhythm. So you don't actually have the natural cycle that your body is supposed to go through, the 4 phases. It's just different for everybody because every woman is different. Our bodies are so different, and it's such a beautiful thing that I love about our human bodies. And that's why I think modern medicine kind of struggle, because they look at everyone as exactly the same. They kind of don't understand that one body is completely different to another. So, on average, we have about a 28-day cycle. Now, that can vary between 21 days and 35 days, just depending on your body. And we have 4 phases. So menstruation, follicular, ovulation, and then luteal phase. And you may have heard this as winter, spring, summer, autumn as well, because I've heard a few people talking about that. And I do love that aspect of it, because if you don't really remember the names, or you don't care about remembering the names, which if you're a woman, I highly recommend that you should start learning about these names. But I also do like using the terms like winter and summer and things like that, because it kind of gives you like a little bit of a picture, I guess, to understand how our bodies work. So For menstruation, that's usually the first part of your cycle. That's when you're bleeding. That's what some people call winter. So, with winter, obviously, you can kind of imagine that's the time you're snugging in, you're relaxing, you're lower in energy. It's cold and raining outside. You're not really doing much. So, menstruation can last between 3 to 7 days. It can last, again, even longer, but on a healthy average, it's about 3 to 7 days. Now, this is actually when your estrogen and progesterone drops. So, this is why you have really low energy when you're menstruating. You actually just don't have those hormones. It's meant to keep you at a really low state because you're meant to be resting and relaxing. This is a period of time where you should be prioritizing rest, relax, going inwards. But basically, what's happening inside your body is this is when your uterus lining is shedding. And that's because your body has confirmed that it is not pregnant. So it sheds that uterus lining as a part of the process because that's what your reproductive process is supposed to be. It's supposed to be you getting pregnant. So it goes through a cycle of trying to get pregnant and then not being pregnant. So at this stage, when you're menstruating, your body goes, okay, I'm not pregnant. It's time to drop that uterus lining because I don't need it. Now, your follicular stage is what some people call spring. So you can imagine that winter has just passed. It's still creeping up a little bit to summer. You're starting to feel better. This is when your energy levels will start to rise a bit closer to ovulation. You're going to start getting a bit more increased energy and things like that. And basically, this is when your body is preparing to release an egg for ovulation. So your body is now preparing itself to get pregnant, basically. Now, this stage can vary between 4 to 12 days, basically just before you ovulate. And ovulation comes roughly around on day 14. So it's about like the middle of your cycle. And you actually only ovulate for about 24 hours. So, what's happening during ovulation is that your body is releasing an egg down the fallopian tubes. It's basically preparing itself to get pregnant. It's putting the egg down so that it can be reached by the sperm. This is when you have an increase of estrogen, and when your energy levels are the highest that it will be during the cycle, you will feel more social, you will feel more yourself, you'll feel more like dancing, you will feel like you want to put yourself more out there, you might be more focused and things like that on work. Your discharge is also different at this time. So if you want to learn to like track your cycle and you're trying to learn when you're ovulating, when you're not, then it's something that you can look out for. So your discharge will usually be very like sticky. You'll be able to like almost pull it apart with your fingers and it will kind of like stick, and it will be like a bit like thicker. And your ovulation is your summer. So, in summertime, that's when you go out and you do the most things. You're taking advantage of the sun, you're have more energy and you're willing to do more things. So that's why it's associated with summertime. And then your fourth phase is your luteal phase, which is associated with autumn. So, as you know, autumn comes before winter. It's kind of when you're like starting to drop, you're starting to slow down. You actually have an increase in progesterone at this time. And this is when a lot of women experience a lot of PMS symptoms, a lot of fatigue, a lot of mood swings. Some women have sore breasts, sore back, things like that. That's kind of like signs that your period is starting to come. And having all this knowledge is really powerful as a woman because this is when you can start to live your life in accordance to your cycle. And this is what cycle syncing is. So, cycle syncing means you start to live your life in accordance to your cycle. It means that you start to understand your cycle and your flows, all your four phases. It means that you start to live a lot more in flow rather than in structure, like, the world and society has built for us. And the reason why I believe it's so powerful is because I believe that this way, as women, we harness our full potential, our full energy, because we're working with our cycle and not against it. We're not in the luteal phase and menstruation phase trying so hard to do all the things when that's when our body, literally our physical body, does not want to do it. It cannot handle it as much because it's in a completely different phase. So, learning how to work with your cycle and work through the flows will be so beneficial to you, and it will help a lot with your overall health as well. So, as an example, you can incorporate, your foods and your herbal teas and everything like that depending on your cycle because we actually need different things depending on the phase of the cycle that we are in. When we are menstruating or even in our luteal phase coming up to menstruation, this is when we should start to enrich our foods with more iron. and along with more iron as well, vitamin C to help us absorb the iron. Because, as you know, obviously, when we're bleeding, we're losing a bit of that iron and we're going to need to replenish our bodies with it. So, learning that, okay, I'm menstruating or I'm about to menstruate, I need to up my iron. You should try to increase your magnesium and your omegas. Omegas will actually help with your cramps as well. And increasing your fiber as well, because a lot of women also get constipation when they're on their bleed, and this will help with that as well. And also avoiding oily and fatty, heavy processed foods, as much as I know we crave them when we're on our bleed, but it actually does not help your body and it does not help with your cramps or anything like that. Just remembering that your cramps are actually your uterus contracting. So we want to help our bodies be able to flow through what it needs to and give our bodies the right nutrients and the right vitamins and the right minerals to help our body do its natural process. Just like you should avoid caffeine when you're menstruating, which I know can be hard for a lot of women, but caffeine in general is not really good for your body in general, but especially when you're menstruating, because it's a vessel constrictor. So it means that it actually restricts your blood flow, which obviously is not good when we're menstruating and we're trying to, have our body be open and release and have a flowing blood flow. Caffeine is also really bad for anxiety and PMS. So if you suffer with anxiety or PMS symptoms, I highly recommend trying to avoid caffeine as much as possible, especially around your menstruation and luteal phases. And when you're ovulating, you might realize that your relationship with food is completely different. You might not need to eat as much, or, you might want to eat different things. Like for me personally, I typically love to eat like a lot of like fruits and things like that. I think that just kind of like really helps with continuing my high energy levels. And there's also like a lot of different herbs and teas and things like that that you can incorporate throughout your cycle in different phases that will help you as well. As an example, for me, I drink a hormone tea about a week before my period and also on my period as well. It's got raspberry leaf tea and things like that inside it, which is really, really good for helping our bodies, helping balance our hormones, helping with cramps, helping with PMS symptoms, and everything like that. So, there are a lot of things that you can do to incorporate inside your diet that will help with your phase and your cycle in general. Exercise is another really important one. So, when you're actually in your menstruation, it's not advised to do a lot of high intensity workouts. It's not advised to do a lot of heavy lifting and things like that, because again, you're putting more strain on your body when your body's already going through a really heavy, heavy process. So, during this time, it is advised to still exercise, but to do more things like walking, or stretching or things like that, or yoga. I mean, yoga is a lot more of like a spiritual thing than like a physical movement thing. But just for the sake of everyone understanding, yoga, like slight stretches and very slow flows and things like that. Whereas when you're ovulating, that's when you can increase your high intensity. That's when you can do more heavy lifting and things like that. And that will actually flow better with your period and with your entire cycle. Because if you start to do heavy lifting right before your period, you're creating a lot of pain in your body, which means that you might have more of a painful period as well. And then cycle syncing also is incredible for work. So, you can understand when you are most focused, when you have the most energy to be able to put into that work. So, obviously, when you're ovulating, and you've got that period of time where you've got the increased levels of estrogen and things like that, where you have that motivation, you have that go, that thrive, that's when we can focus our things on work and learn to work when it suits our body the best. Because if you're trying to push yourself and be super focused when you're menstruating, it might not really work that well, because again, your hormones are different, so you might not be as focused. So for me personally, that means that I film a lot more of my content when I'm in my follicular stage or my ovulation, and I tend to do a lot more like editing and, slow things like that when I'm in my luteal phase or my menstruation phase, because I don't necessarily feel like turning on a camera when I'm in my menstruation phase, or even in my luteal phase, especially towards the end when you're like kind of really starting to drop. Like the week before my period, I'm kind of already switched off from the world. So that's not the time where I feel like turning on a camera and recording. So, learning to work with your cycle will help you with your work as well because you can try to figure out when to do what and what works best for you and your body. And that's a bit of trial and error. It's going to be something that I highly recommend looking into tracking your cycle because it's going to help you. Because the more you start to observe and realize, hey, I'm feeling this way when I'm ovulating. Hey, I'm feeling this way when I'm in my luteal phase. And the more you track this and the more you start to understand this, the easier it will become. Because at the start, it can seem a little overwhelming and, there's a lot to think about and there's a lot to consider. This is why I say it's just important just to start tracking it in some sort of way. You can use a journal, you can use apps. There's a lot of good apps out there. For me personally, I love the Stardust app. I have used Clue and things like that in the past, but I love Stardust. First of all, it's made by a woman, so that's fantastic. And that's already 10 out of 10 for me. But the reason why an app can be really helpful as well is, especially like something like Stardust, it shows you your hormone levels as well. So it actually shows you a graph of your hormone levels, where they're at, and where they're predicted to be. And tracking your cycle is going to help you so much with cycle syncing so that you can understand how your body works, so that you can understand your phases of your body and what to do in each phase, because everyone is different and we need to work out how to work with our body and not against our body. So there's actually a lot of things that we can avoid to help our bodies and to help our natural flow of our cycle. And one of the things is, unfortunately, avoiding a lot of the feminine products, especially the ones that are bleached and, have a lot of things on them. Unfortunately, there's a lot of chemicals in there and they're endocrine disruptors. They actually mess with our hormones. Now, there are a lot of great, like, natural brands coming out that, are more organic, they don't use bleach. There's a lot more things coming out now. Now, unfortunately, a lot more of the natural products and things like that are more expensive. So, obviously, you can only really do your best, but there's something that we can avoid. Now, for me personally, I love period underwear, but I've also heard a lot of good things about like the Diva cups, like silicone menstruation cups, which basically just, they get inserted and they sit there inside your vagina and they collect your blood and then you tip them out and then you rinse it and you put it back up there. Now, I personally have not tried that. I'm just super happy with period underwear. I gave up on using pads and tampons. I was a big tampon person. I used tampons like all the time. And then when I got into holistic healing and natural healing and everything like that, and I learned about all the shit that's in our pads and tampons, I stopped using them and I switched over to period underwear. I love period underwear. It's so easy. You wear it, you quickly wash it, and that's it. It's like done. It's pretty easy and it absorbs just like a pad. I wear it during the day, I wear it at nighttime. You can get so many different types and varieties now. You can get some that are like even G strings. You can get some for really, really heavy flows. Like there's a variety out there, and it's beautiful to see a lot more options coming out. Another thing that's also fucking with our hormones are things like synthetic fragrances and a lot of chemicals that are in our household products. So, perfumes, candles, even your dish soap, and things like that. And is it can be a lot to try to understand because when you're trying to switch over to a holistic lifestyle and you're learning about all the chemicals in everything, it can be very overwhelming and it can seem like a lot to need to try to switch everything. As I say, always just do your best, go slow, but please do your own research because it's really sad that we are not educated on how much these things around our home actually affect us and our body. And one of the main things that we can do for our health and our body overall is just to eat a more clean diet. And that includes whole foods. So trying to eat as whole foods as possible, eat as little processed foods as possible, try to avoid things that you don't even understand. So when you're reading the ingredients of a packaging, if it's got numbers and flavors and things that you don't even understand what's in there, I highly recommend avoiding them. A lot of those things are very inflammatory for our bodies, which does not help at all, especially if you're already struggling with PCOS or endometriosis. So, focusing on an anti inflammatory diet is going to help you and your cycle overall. And concluding this episode, as somebody who was diagnosed with these things and were told it was incurable, and now coming to a place where I've healed most of my symptoms and feeling so much better, I just want to remind you to not give up on yourself and to please, like I always say, keep doing your own research, keep being curious, keep learning about your body because our bodies are so fascinating. They're so complex and there's so much to our bodies that we are still learning today. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this episode and I hope it informed you in some sort of way and maybe empowered you as a woman to take charge and to, learn to work with your cycle and not against it. And that hopefully that helps you with your life overall. Anyway, I'm sending you so much love. Blessings.